Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is so exciting. 250 people are with us. My name is Hardy, and I'm with Earthcapades Environmental Theater, and we are so thrilled to be hosting the Pacific Beach Coalition on our Crowdcast channel here. And we are extra excited tonight to be doing this program that is by teens, for teens, and it is going to be an awesome program. Want to let you know about Crowdcast. You can ask questions right down below there in the Ask a Question tab. You can put your questions there, and hopefully your questions will be answered in the live program. And if not, they'll be answered right there in the Ask a Question tab under comments. Also, there is the chat there as well. And you can see right below me, it says support junior PBC work. You can donate by just clicking on that button right there. But now, without further ado, I would like to bring you the president of the Pacific Beach Coalition, my dear friend and amazing human being, Lynn Adams. Here she comes. Boom.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ted's Whale Talk Ted's Whale Talk for Teens. I'm so proud of our Junior Albatross team members, the Pacific Beach Coalition team. They've been working very hard to bring this to you and to kind of create a program that you guys will enjoy. Like Hardy said, please, if you have questions for our scientists, we'd like to ask them. They will be asking. You can ask them, and they will be moderating it. And I invite you to join the Pacific Beach Coalition to kind of check us out as well. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you two of our junior Pacific Beach Coalition Albatross members, Sophie Wall, a junior, and Simone, also a junior. So go ahead and wave. We got Sophie and Simone, and they're going to take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Hardy and Lynn, for helping put this together, and for all of you taking the time to be with us tonight.
Yeah, I think it's so inspiring seeing the turnout today. What is it, Sophie? 263 people. That's incredible. And I think it's especially inspiring because while there's a lot one person can do to make a difference, I think we see real change in numbers and when people come together like this. And especially having us all, most of us, I guess, be teenagers and kids, I think it's so crucial for us to learn about things like whales early on. So when we're adults out in the world, we can make better decisions and choices for whales and the environment, and really ensure that future generations are able to enjoy seeing whales off the coast as we are today. So
yeah, totally. And today, to tell us about the whales, we have scientist Ted Cheeseman. He is currently a PhD student studying humpback whales at Southern Cross University in Australia. He has spent time organizing expeditions to Antarctica and also does trips here in the Bay Area to look at humpbacks. Ted is the founder of happywhale.com, which is a citizen science program that uses pictures of whale tails to identify them off our coasts. He's also a surfer living in Santa Cruz. You will be able to ask questions to him about science, whales, or his career. So they can be put into the Ask a Questions tab or also the chat. So this webinar is obviously open to everyone, and we're so happy to have everyone. But we also really want students to be able to contribute the most. So students, please ask your questions.
yes, and thanks Sophie and Lynn for the awesome introduction. And without further ado, please welcome Ted.
Cool. Hey, super stoked. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and give a little talk, and let's see. Is that working? No, it's not. There we go. Yeah. So Can you guys see my screen? All right. Give me a. Actually, just tell me if you can, because I can't actually see anyone. Well, I'm super stoked that so many folks have shown up. I kind of normally, I have a talk that I give about whales, but this is just such a different audience, and I'm super stoked because normally I talk to folks my age or older, and that's cool. It's really great to educate folks about the ocean, but there's a lot of like set in our ways kind of things about adults from my age and onward. And I think, and so I changed the subtitle. I mean, normally it's like sharing the science, what citizen science is doing for marine conservation science. And, but I think it's a very different context here because you all, mostly students, you are I guess I'm really stoked to talk to you because you're the ones that really make a difference. Like, we really have set the bar really low. We're pretty much screwing everything up. I think if you look around right now, we're not doing a great job at ocean conservation. We're not even doing a decent job at like governing the world and managing pandemics and, not burning down the White House and all that kind of thing. So really the context here is like, what can you do looking forward, since we're not leaving the planet in the greatest state for you, but there's still, quite frankly, there's still beautiful lives to lead and a lot of opportunities ahead of you. I think, I don't know about everyone in here, but in general, just the fact that we have computers and internet connections, we are generally the lucky ones. We are the ones with resources at our disposal. And I think it's really important that we think about that. We appreciate it and we use it to the best we can. I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit of my story and how I got into science and what I think we can do with this. And I want to set the stage a little bit because to me, right now we're like in the midst of the deployment of the COVID vaccine, which hopefully will, save us from ourselves, save us from, a virus that we didn't manage to control with social behavior. We could have, but we didn't. So yay science for coming in and doing this, honestly, a really incredibly fast pace, this mRNA vaccine or multiple mRNA vaccines being deployed out here. And I think at this point in world's history, we really need to look to science for many of our solutions, but looking to science isn't like, we tend to be kind of product takers about science. That is like, oh, the scientist said, or, oh, this discovery was made, or, oh, here's this new vaccine. But the reality is the science is us. And any of you could be, the Nobel Prize winning scientist who finds the way to capture carbon in a way that's cheap enough that it sends us down a different path in the future where we're not cooking ourselves in the way that we're setting the planet up for today. So my own history, I was a pretty fortunate kid. My father here in the foreground in this little Saratoga newspaper clip from let's see, that's my daughter who's 24 now. It makes me feel old. There in my arms as a 2-month-old. So this was taken, 24 years ago. I grew up with a zoologist's parents who started a wildlife safari company when I was a kid. So I had really awesome opportunities at my fingertips. And by the time I was more or less, the age of I think most of the folks here, kind of late high school years, I started leading wildlife safaris around the world. And most of my career has been dragging people into the areas that, historically speaking, were like the big unknowns. And particularly, I'm fond of the ocean for that because, what is the ocean to most of us? I mean, it's here, many of us in California, it's like a beautiful place to spend the afternoon and watch the sunset over the sea. But as far as the great majority of human history, the ocean represents the unknown, and we have a different relationship we have the opportunity to have a different relationship with unknowns, but typically the unknown is perceived as probably hostile. And that's really how we've looked at most of the ocean and most of the ocean's creatures over the great majority of human history. So, here, early depictions of sea serpents and whales, dangerous creatures that were going to eat us. But that's not, that's not my experience. And that's, I think, not the experience we need to have if we want oceans to be healthy environments that, help us have our own healthy environments. I mean, I don't know if you can see in the background here in my little picture, but I've got a couple pictures of whales on the walls that I have swam with. And, here in this drawing, we've got balena and orca, early depictions of baleen whales and killer whales as monsters that were going to eat you. This is an evolving story, of course, with humanity. There was the unknown, and then that unknown came into the known as products, right? As things we could make a profit off of. The first human interaction with whales were dead whales washing ashore and people literally chopping up the dead carcasses, cooking them down into oil and selling that oil. We think of whaling as this thing that's so long ago and far away, but actually the reality is, I guess the frame here is much of what we have come to learn about the wilds of the world is learning about it through exploitation. Find this thing so that we can make a profit off of it. And, in the sort of Moby Dick era, age of sail, a whaling we will go. Well, that's kind of the story that we think of with whaling, but actually the modern story of whaling is where, so last century, about 3 million whales were taken out of the ocean. And I look at this thinking like, wow, is this the way that we want to interact with wild spaces one after another? We generally think of whaling as something long ago and far away, but that's it's really not. This photo is from the 50s, but there's photos taken at a whaling station in San Francisco Bay that didn't close until 1971. And in 1971, the reason it closed was because of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which was us as a society deciding, hey, we value marine mammals. We think that we should pass a law saying that it is not okay, it's illegal to harm a marine mammal. My uncle actually worked at the plant that packaged the meat from this whaling station just before I was born. So pretty close. And this history is we basically vacuumed up the oceans. Imagine all the whales that it would take to feed this ship, right? So this is basically one of the last of the big factory ships. After the rest of the world decided, well, actually all the major ocean nations of the world signed an international agreement saying no more whaling. Well, Russia signed it too, but they turned around and decided, well, we're going to go out and capture all the rest of the whales anyway. And I don't want to point a finger at Russia. This was teamwork, right? All the nations of the world were involved, and I'm not going to. This will be like one of two graphs in this whole presentation. But the reality of this story here is the way we've interacted with the ocean is just one stage after another of fishing down the food chain, pulling things out of the ocean for profit. And here you've got each of these different lines represents a different species of whale. First, not even making it onto the graph are two of the easiest to catch whales that were basically gone by 1900. And then humpback whales, my personal favorite, pretty much the easiest of these to catch, taken first. And then as technology got better, it was like, okay, we'll take the blue whales, biggest ones. Okay, they're all gone. We'll take the fin whales, they're all gone, and on down the food chain, like the next. So such that that blue whales, the largest creatures that have ever existed on the planet, 100 years ago, there were probably 350 or 250,000 blue whales in the Antarctic Ocean, right? That was the biggest population of those. We have about 3,000 blue whales on the California coast. Imagine 100 times that. Within 20 years, they were basically all gone. And by the end of the whaling period, what you had left were empty oceans, right? So basically, 999 out of every 1,000 blue whales were removed. If you think about that, and I guess I know this is kind of depressing stuff, but I say this kind of just to put a frame on how we've related to the oceans and how I think we need to kind of learn from that and look forward to a different way of treating the earth, the oceans going forward, right? So this empty oceans, imagine, okay, so San Francisco's population's about, I think it's about like 800 or 900,000 people. Imagine if in 20 years there were only 800 people in San Francisco, and what would our culture be like? Like, imagine if you removed 999 people out of 1,000. It'd just be a totally different environment. Fortunately for whales, they became commercially extinct before they were biologically extinct. So they basically got hunted out, but then the hunting stopped and the Save the Whales movement came along. The products that were made from whales became cheaper and cheaper even while they got scarcer. And so they had a chance to begin to recover. Most species of whales are now recovering from whaling or in various stages of still responding to that kind of hunting. That's definitely, like, I'm breezing by, so much history here, but such as it is, I'm just going to keep going with that because now the relationship with, at least in whales in particular, is much more this is kind of where my own story enters in, and this is where my own photos began here, is like, this is the majority of the human interaction with whales is, whoa, cool, something awesome to watch. Or even in my case, like, I kind of literally sell whales as a guide on Antarctic expeditions. Normally this time of year, right now, I would be in Antarctica. This year's different, obviously, because of COVID, but here it is, like, okay, cool, we can watch whales. And so my own history, I studied conservation biology, but had this family company my parents started. It was like, okay, cool, I can keep guiding to Antarctica. So I ended up working in this, but I always wanted to get back to science. And this was the opportunity to do so, which is that, I was out there telling people about these wild animals, and I photographed this whale. This was back in 2004. Most of you won't remember it, but once upon a time, we photographed with film, and we couldn't actually see our pictures until, like, however long after. On an Antarctic expedition, it would be a month later. But this was the first year I took a digital camera to Antarctica. And it was so cool because it was like, whoa, we can look at our pictures. And I was looking at this photo and I was showing it to people saying, hey, look, and those scrapes that you see on the tail, those lines, that's because this whale was actually attacked by a killer whale as a calf. And the unique thing about humpbacks is that the undersides of their tails, their flukes, as we call them, are individually recognizable. So whenever a whale dives, whenever a humpback dives, almost always it'll lift its tail up. And the natural markings and scars on its tail give us a chance to recognize the individual. And the cool thing about that is that it's a great tool for science for doing what are called mark recapture studies. So, and that's basically the heart of the science I do, is these mark recapture studies where you're basically saying, okay, let's recognize as many individuals we can, then come back the next year and look at them again and see how many are the same animals, where are they, figure out, is their population growing? Is it declining? Is it a healthy species? And if it's not, if there's something going, if there's a marine heat wave, does that correlate with the population decrease and so on? So cool thing about whales is, they're really hard to, you could do this, say, with rabbits, you put a little tag on them and you come back again. But with whales, you can't really do that. So very happily, they have these natural markings. I photographed this whale, and like 2 or 3 days later, I went to the U.S. Research station there on the Antarctic Peninsula. And in the men's bathroom, I saw this photo hanging on the wall. And I'm like, I recognize the background. That's the Gerlache Straits. That's like where I work every day down there. And, and here's my whale. I'm like, oh, wow, so super cool. But from a guide's point of view, I wanted to be telling this story I wanted to know the story of each whale I was seeing. And I didn't have access to that story. At the same time, I also knew like, whoa, here's a bit of science, right? So here's this really cool couple of data points, but I didn't have any way to get that science into the hands of scientists. So a little bit more whale tails. They're just beautiful. Here you've got like natural markings, all those kind of fireworks, but also scars. And they scar white on black and black on white. So like the rings you see, those are barnacle scars. Whale had a barnacle on it when it was young. It's kind of like, you have a really bad acne and maybe it'll make a scar and 20 years later you can still see that a little bit. So killer whales, these 4 different whales that were attacked by killer whales as calves, wearing those scars for the rest of their lives. Here's a case of 2 different whales that were entangled in crab pots, crab fisheries, and that scarred their tails. So lots and lots of different patterns. Some of them, like those I've showed you, super distinct. Some of them, like this tail in the top right there, super not distinct, like all black. And so what the science I've done in particular is gathered thousands of these photos, and what we did is we've automated the image recognition of this rather than, so there was a huge study back about 15 years ago that took as many photos as possible from the North Pacific and gathered them all together and spent a ton of time, just thousands of hours matching them all one to the next one. And that's all fine and great, but that's a really, really hard thing to keep doing, especially as numbers of photos keep growing. So we thought, hey, if we could gather all these photos, what if we can make the computer recognize them? And then we could just, gather them, automate their recognition, and build a website to ask people to send us photos. And then we can tell people who is in their photos, what whale is in their photos, and then turn around and and then track that whale over time. So that's what we've done, and that's what Happy Whale is a website where basically we ask people, hey, set your camera, shoot pictures of the whales, submit them to us, and so here's a picture of a whale, and we match it to a set of known whales using this automated image recognition, and then we're able to say, cool, your whale has been seen 15 times over the last, in this case, a whale seen, I think it was 11 times between 1997 and 2020, just here off the west coast of Maui. So any one contributor, much as I think it was Simone who said that, it's like any one of us can't do necessarily, we can't change the whole world by ourselves alone, but together. And this is, some people photographed, 5 different whales and sent them to us. Some people photographed 500, but no one of us has really contributed that much. But globally, when we add it all together, in the middle of this here is the North Pacific, and we literally know almost every humpback whale in the North Pacific. So this has been super game changing in terms of being able to see, what's happening with these whales using automated image recognition, add it all together. And so what I'm doing with this science is I'm trying to give the data to those who are trying to use it to do basically to make the ocean safer. And one case, right here, I'm giving a presentation on a lovely little computer that came from Asia in a box on a ship. Every time a ship enters San Francisco Bay, it's going right through prime whale feeding habitat, right? So this time of year, there's not too many whales out there, but in our summertime, there's quite a lot. And how, the reality is we're urbanizing the ocean. So how can we take that, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but it is a reality. We are using the oceans super intensively. How can we make our use of the oceans compatible? It's one thing to say, oh, no shipping, but that doesn't really work. We kind of like our computers and we like the stuff that gets shipped around the world. And even if we individually are going to say no to that, well, not everyone is. So how can we make it so that, there's been a few cases of shipping lanes being moved just a little bit so that they're not running over whale habitat, and ships can pass by, whales can keep feeding, and we can all live happily together. One of the things we've found with this is part of our findings, but also before us. Our California humpback whales, some of them, like prior to that study I referred to, we used to think that our whales were kind of like on their way to Alaska to feed. It was only 15 years ago that we realized, hey, no, these whales, California humpback whales, are coming to California to feed. Very few of them travel further north. These numbers are of encounters of identified individuals. Very few of our whales are going up to Alaska. Very few of our whales are going over to Maui. The great majority of our whales travel between, or humpback whales I'm talking about, travel between California and Mexico, and some of them to Central America. So what we've been trying to do is say, okay, what are the patterns we can see within this, and how can we use those patterns to better arrange the way that humans use the waters? This here, Monterey Bay, I think many of you may have heard, like crab season this year got delayed. The opening of crab season was delayed, I think, almost 2 months because of the potential interaction between crab fisheries and whales. This is in Monterey Bay, where we have lots of data. We can literally look at it and say, okay, where are the whales going to be versus where would we want to put the crab pots? Or looking at a global scale, what happens, I don't know if any of you have heard of the blob. That was this marine heat wave that came into the North Pacific 2013 through 15. And we looked at this and we saw a huge impact on whale breeding from those years on through 2017. They seem to recover now, but the crazy thing is, like, this is the reality of climate change. Like, we're going to be seeing this again and again. How are the whales going to deal with that? How are the oceans, what is the state of the future of our oceans? One of the things I'm having a lot of fun looking at is looking at, like, how are whales moving back into habitats that they were hunted out of. The Antarctic Peninsula, when I first started going down there 20 years ago, actually 26 years ago, there were almost no whales, and now we see huge numbers of them. We see the same story happening down around Los Angeles, like Newport Beach in the south east end of this image. There were almost no humpback whales coming in there just 10 years ago. And the waters between Washington and British Columbia, almost no humpback whales in there 20 years ago. And now they're coming back. So this has a huge implications for how, like, it's pretty instructive for understanding, how do we avoid this happening? This is a whale in Mexico that was hit by a ship, another whale in Monterey Bay that was hit by a ship. These whales survived, many don't. This is a whale, the sighting history of a whale that we named Two Nails. We saw the whale month after month repeatedly, and then we saw the whale entangled in crab traps looking a bit like this, and then we never saw that whale again. So this stuff, it's super brutal to even look at, but it's kind of part of, it's a big part of my work, is trying to bring this stuff in so it's not out of sight, out of mind. And I think that's something, like, it's really easy to just look at the oceans and think, like, oh yeah, everything's fine. We set up some rules and we set some fishing limits, and yay, it's all happy. But the reality is that unless we look, and are willing to see images like this, a lot of these whales, this here Scarlet is a whale that got named. Well, we ID'd the whale, found out that she was known to be born in the early 2000s, actually figured out who her mother was. But she got named Scarlet because she was wrapped in a crab pot line, and she became emaciated, and she was starving, and her body condition got so bad that she got covered in lice. Cool thing was, she actually managed to throw off the crab pot, and she began to recover. But then she was pretty darn skinny, and then actually, unfortunately, died about 6 months later, we think, because of this. But sometimes there's super happy outcomes. Here was a whale on the top here that was photographed just after being cut free from some fishing lines, and the boat. The whale was named Okie Dokie because the boat that followed her while entangled was the boat Okie Dokie. whale was seen 6 months later in perfectly good condition. So sometimes happier endings, but the reality for this is like a lot of times we just never see those whales again. These are 5 different whales that haven't been seen since an entanglement. Actually, this is kind of something that happened just last night. This was a kind of a gruesome photo on the left there. It's the tail of a dead whale. But this happened 2 years ago. The whale was photographed after washing ashore. It had been hit by a ship. And just last night, we figured out who this whale was using this automated image recognition. So really what we're trying to do is set up a scene where we can manage and step into this environment and say, how can we use better information to make the oceans healthier? We've had some huge successes. One of them, my favorite story, is in the Antarctic, where we got together all this data, and like by getting people both giving us data of where the whales are, but also being involved in the collection of the data, we got all the tour companies, all the cruise ship companies that go to Antarctica, 100% of them agreed that in this area, the kind of the orange triangle or the red triangle on the left there, no ship will travel at higher than 10 miles per hour in that area, so as to protect whales. So I'm really loving this from this kind of like participatory science point of view. People send us photos. We say, hey, your whale's new to science. If the whale is not an individual we've seen before, hey, your whale's been identified, and can send people updates of their whales over time. And what that's allowed us to do is build basically a family of contributors who because they want to know who's in their photos. 10 years or 5 years ago when we started this, we'd only just get a few photos and it was enough to be like, oh yeah, that's a cute story. Now we are getting enough images to actually be able to track whole populations. What I've been having a lot of fun doing is trying to use the same model and say, how can we get people involved in science in other environments? Like here's a good friend of mine who's a PhD student down in San Diego at Scripps, who runs a project where they have people do plankton tows and gather the plankton samples and send them to her, and she in Antarctica charts where different types of plankton are in relation to melting glaciers and such. And same thing with like counting penguins and such. So that this kind of participatory science, I think it's really, really powerful stuff. And I'll kind of stop there. And hopefully the idea here, I think, is that all you guys are really the ocean ambassadors of the future, where if you so choose, there's so much possible for you to dig into. I think there's just we tend to think of science as something that's like done far away, but it's totally at your fingertips to dive into, and there is so much unknown. It really is upon us to use science to guide a better management of the oceans in the world. So yeah, with that, take questions.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we're going to move into questions. Thanks. That was awesome. So we have a lot of questions already, and there's some questions like, oh, should you put them in the chat or in the ask a question? You can do either or if you continue to have more questions. So a first question that I like is, do whales interact with surfers? So as a surfer yourself, maybe.
Oh my God, there's this video. I wonder if I can find it real quick, of a whale surfing in Australia. It literally is like surfing a wave to catch fish. Oh man, where would that be? It's just so cool. But I mean, okay, so I have been surfing with dolphins where like I'm in a wave and there's a dolphin right alongside of me, which is cool because like if there's another surfer in the wave, it's kind of like, oh, one surfer per wave, kick out, But with dolphins, it's like they're totally psyched on. Actually, on my wedding day, the morning of my wedding day, I was out with dolphins in the waves. It was one of the best days of my life. Do whales actually interact with surfers? Not very much. You know, they're kind of like, they're doing their thing. Yeah, if I could, I don't know if I can find this video, I'll quickly show it. It's actually of a whale using a wave to speed it up to come into this schools of fishes that are in the shallows. But yeah, pretty awesome.
Okay. Well, we have a kind of an interesting question for the next one. One person's wondering I don't know if you know this, but what caused them to evolve to become the large size they are? Because they're saying usually with evolution, they get smaller during this.
Cool question. Okay, so the neat thing, one of my favorite things, this is kind of a tangent, but one of my favorite things about marine science is that it's not the hugest field, right? So after a few years of doing this, I feel like I know most whale scientists in some way. There's like, you know, 1 or 2 steps removed. There's this guy by the name of Jeremy Goldbogen, super sharp guy. He's a professor at Hopkins Marine Station, Stanford University. I haven't worked directly with him, but my PhD professor works very closely with him, and he published a paper a couple years ago where they kind of turned that question around. They kind of said, like, well, why aren't whales bigger, right? Why isn't anything bigger on this planet? You got blue whales, which are, as far as we know, the largest animal that has ever lived. Why are they not bigger? And if you think about it, like, as we get bigger, you know, we all know, like, an ant can lift, you know, 10 times its body weight or whatever. Well, we can't really exactly lift something 10 times our body weight and carry it down the road because of just like the physics of things getting larger. And as you get bigger, it becomes very difficult to get oxygen to your blood cells, right? Because there's just, I mean, a blue whale's heart is like, you know, is half the size of this room. I'm in a little office here. That's pumping blood all the way to the last capillary in its fins, right? So they get bigger because it's more efficient to eat when you're large. And the crazy thing, I mean, that humpback whale there, the front third of its body is its mouth, right? So it's basically like this massive mouth pushed by a tail, right? And so the way that works is they're eating some of the littlest things on the planet, right? Or, well, technically what are mid-sized animals, but krill and fish that are kind of in the, you know, from 2 inches up to maybe 5 or 10 inches at the largest. So it's more efficient for them to eat a lot of them at a time. And the bigger you are, the more efficient that gets. But also the bigger you are, the more energy it takes to be big. So at some point, and blue whales are the extreme of that, they are so big that they can only feed on krill, which are really, really rich food, right? Whereas a humpback whale, which is about a third the size, humpback whales can eat krill, they can eat sardines, they can eat anchovies, they can eat herring, they can eat menhaden, all kinds of different fish. So it's kind of this like, you know, it's like, cool, you have a really huge truck, but then, oh my God, the gas, you know, and then the carbon emissions, like, you know, at some point, size has a cost. That's why.
Okay, yeah. So we also have a question. Do humpback whales stay in pods like dolphins, or like what does their social life look like?
Social life of a humpback whale. So when I was first learning about whales, people said, oh, humpback whales are solitary. And it's a little bit of a weird statement because they do spend a lot of time solo. They spend time they do not hang out in pods. It's not like killer whales or dolphins. The killer whales have the tightest social lives, way tighter than ours, right? We think of ourselves as super social creatures. Killer whales, a male killer whale will spend his entire life in his mom's pod. And if mom dies, that son tends to have a much higher chance of dying in the next few years, like these super tight bonds, right? Humpback whales, not like that. And they don't seem to have long-term associations like coming back together with, you know, like finding their mom again. But there are some exceptions to that. They feed together. There's social feeding. And this is super cool. They'll get together in Alaska where they feed on pretty large fish. And so because they're feeding on larger fish, any one fish has a better chance of escaping one humpback whale. But if it's 10 whales feeding together, then escapes one whale but ends up in the mouth of the next one. So this is actually pretty structured, and they'll be like, some of the older whales appear to be the ones that acoustically they'll say, okay, you know, something like, I mean, anthropomorphizing, but they're like, okay, now is the time to start swimming up. And then they'll blow a big ring of bubbles, and all the whales will come up inside of it. And it's the same whales year after year that are getting together and doing that. So there's definitely social lives, but it's structured in a way that we're not really too sure about. The other thing is that they all sing the same songs. And so there's must be some level of recognition of each other in this concept of, you know, like singing the same tune.
Wow. And why do they sing? That kind of goes into the next question about, like, is it communication, or what is that for?
Definitely it's communication. Let's see if I can. It's totally worth hearing some whale song for a second here. I'm just trying to pull some up. Totally communication. It's only the males that sing. They sing on the feeding grounds almost only, and during the breeding. On the breeding grounds almost only. Only during breeding season. Why they sing, we don't really know, but it seems to be, it's not like, hey, ladies, come on over here. And it's not like, I'm the big tough guy, you know, take off, because that dynamic doesn't happen. It seems like it's some kind of singing to create the environment for breeding. So here, can you hear that?
Yeah.
So these are the most complicated songs in the non-human environment. They basically have structure as complex as an opera. And we don't really know what they're saying, or if that is, you know, language in there, but it's definitely a complex song, and all the whales in the same ocean basin, all the humpbacks will sing the same song. Kind of a cool conservation story about this, though. These songs were first detected by military technology, and they called them biologicals. Like, they didn't know what it was. It was, you know, in the Cold War, and Americans are listening for Russian submarines that might be invading, and they're hearing these crazy tunes, and they contacted some biologists, and they're like, can you figure out what these are? Guy named Roger Payne, and he produced a record. That's actually what I was playing you, that record, which was published in National Geographic, sent to like everyone who had a National Geographic subscription. And this was when there was still whaling going on. And just by hearing the music created by whales, society was just like, wait, we're killing these things? And most of whales were being killed and turned into margarine and dog food and fertilizer. So suddenly it was this like social revelation that like, there's this incredibly beautiful thing out there and we're turning them into dog food. Like, is that okay? No, it's not. And I think that same thing applies right now. We look at the ocean as this kind of like big, vast, infinite thing. Just dump your plastic in there, okay, you know, and it's not okay, you know, and we need to kind of like open our eyes and see that same scale of things. And unfortunately today we have so much like the barrage of media, but that's to me a big role of science is saying, hey, look, this is going on. You can't just deny it. Anyway, that's a bit off topic of why they sing, but.
Yeah, I feel like we could have a whole talk just on whale singing. But going into like climate change, I have a question. What would be the impact on humans if whales went extinct?
Well, fortunately, they seem to be holding on pretty strong. And most large whales are actually increasing in population. And that's a really complicated story. But we think that they're doing, you know, most species do pretty well. There's a few species that are really nasty exceptions. But okay, so there's that story, like when you start taking strands of a spider web one at a time, you take a couple strands, the web's still there, but once you pick out enough, the whole thing falls apart. That's the ocean, right? The ocean is not as rich as it was before humans came along. Almost every commercial fish species is depleted, and there's this shifting baseline, and I think this is like important for you guys to realize. You go out into the world and you think of you experience what you experience now, and you think, okay, well, this is how natural is. But the reality is, we've been changing things for hundreds and hundreds of years. So what would happen if the oceans went, if whales were gone? If whales were gone, they wouldn't be bringing nutrients up to the surface. With less nutrients at the surface, you would have less phytoplankton. With less phytoplankton, you have less basic energy at the top of the ocean. You would then have less fish. You would have less. I mean, it's just like a poorer world. A strong parallel to that is what happened in Yellowstone when all the wolves were hunted out, right? So in the early 1900s, we killed the last of the wolves, and as a result, there were tons of elk because the elk weren't being hunted by the wolves. And so the elk ate all the trees. And then there were just basically no trees growing up, right? So then you had places that started to erode because riverbanks were eroding because there weren't the trees holding the soil together. So it's like you got a whole system. You start taking parts out of your engine or your car, it might take a few parts out and it still works, but you take that one part out and then it all just falls apart. Whales are super important in the ecosystem and in ways that we don't even understand yet. That's kind of part of the fun of it, really.
Well, I know you've spent a lot of time in Antarctica yourself, and I was wondering if you personally saw any changes because of global warming yourself. Did you see any changes?
It's so crazy. I wish I could be like, oh yeah, no, it's happening at a pace that we can't really see, because that's like what you would expect. I mean, climate changes over thousands of years. We literally plan voyages differently than we used to, right? There's areas where it used to be ice covered pretty consistently, and now it's just open water. In the Antarctic, not nearly as much as in the Arctic. In the Arctic, it's super stunning how quickly. So basically, if we want to go on a voyage where we see polar bears, we would tend to want to go when there's still some sea ice around. In particular, the Svalbard archipelago is a place where we like to take folks to see wild Arctic oceans and landscapes, and we want some sea ice around, and that used to be kind of late July, mid-July. Now it's early June. It's so crazy, just and sometimes by early June, all the sea ice is gone. It's pretty stunning, and that's kind of impressive for what we see, but what we don't see is the part that's, I think, really wild, which is what are the dynamics going on in the ocean that we're essentially we need science to see. We need to have the plankton biologists digging through the data to see, or to look at over time, what's the pregnancy rate of whales. Hey, I found this video. I have to share this. It's just too cool. So I'm going to share my screen again real quick here. Oops, wrong button. There we go. So check this out. You can see my screen, yeah?
Yeah.
This is the thing called the Brooder's whale. And it literally uses the wave to push it into that school, that dark patch there. I love it. The surfer's maybe I won't take that wave. And then that dark patch, those are all fish. Yeah. Body surfing whale. Okay. Oops. There.
Okay, we have a lot of just kind of basic whale questions and facts. So I'm going to ask you, why do whales migrate? And specifically, they asked, why do whales migrate south?
So most whales will do some kind of movement from colder waters where the feeding is really good to warmer waters where oftentimes they'll go to those warmer waters to breed. But they probably don't go to breed. It's just something they do while they're there. They probably go because their skin gets lots of stuff growing on it when they're in colder water. Because like if you stick your hand in a bucket of water, bucket of frozen, like ice water, your hand will go numb, right? Well, while your hand is numb, it's because blood is not flowing out to your skin. And when you don't have blood flowing out to your skin, you can't grow new skin. Whales, because of the nature of like, you spend too long in the water and your hands get all wrinkly, right? Water is tough on skin. They regrow their skin super constantly. They're literally like so much faster than we do. And so what they need to do is literally go to warmer waters where they can refresh their skin, kind of like cleaning a boat from all the growth that grows on the hull of the boat, which after a time it weighs down the boat and makes it run slower. That's probably why. Oops, I can't hear you, Simona.
Yeah.
You're muted.
Oh my gosh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So do you remember a few years ago, we were seeing so many beached whales? What kind of causes that variation, and why were so many whales beached then, and why are we not seeing as many as that year now?
Yeah, so we think, so those are gray whales, right? And they were beaching because they were, while migrating back north. So the gray whales, they feed up in the Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea, up in the, they're huge long distance migrants, swim about 5,000 miles each way, right? So they're going from like northern Alaska, Russia, down to coastal Mexico to breed in some shallow lagoons. And what seems to have happened is they had at least one, maybe a couple really bad years where they just weren't getting enough food. And so they still migrated, although there weren't many calves born, and then a lot of them were dying on the way back north, basically starvation. So to us, the big question is like, okay, well, is this just natural? Like some years are bad years, okay? Or is this a sign of what's to come? Is it climate change? So gray whales probably have recovered to their natural populations. They were the first whales to be hunted in coastal California, and they were the first whales to be protected. I think back in I can't remember exactly, I think it was like 1910 or 1920 that they were, that killing of gray whales was banned. There were almost none of them left, but they slowly began to recover. And so we think their population numbers are natural, right? So, nature's cruel. Sometimes there's a bad year, but we think that it's probable that their food, which they feed on crustaceans on the seafloor, that are probably pretty susceptible to warming temperatures, and it might have been climate change. Hard to say.
Okay, so we have another question about why there's so many whales off the coast of California and in this area. Is it because of the migration, or do they just like it here for some reason?
Super rich waters. That's why. Yeah, we are so blessed. I mean, okay, but structurally, we have the continental shelf, like as Monterey Bay is the extreme of it, right? You go straight out of Moss Landing in the back of Monterey Bay, and you're in multiple thousand feet deep water within just a couple miles out, right? So we have super deep water, and then prevailing winds blow from the northwest, so that pushes surface waters in, and it causes a current that brings cold water up to the surface. So deep cold waters mean a lot of productivity, right? And that's why we have like a really productive crab fishery, and that's why I don't know if any of you have read Cannery Row, the great Steinbeck book, right? We have these really productive fisheries. That's because of this productive water. And the whales, they're like, yeah, food's good. Let's make this place home. It's just, yeah. productive ocean. Oh, you're muted again.
Okay, sorry. Going more into whale identification, are there other ways to identify your whales besides the tails? Like,
Yeah.
they were asking about like whale poop. Is that something?
Whale poop is, oh yeah, well, we got to talk about whale poop. I mean, of course. So, yeah, I know a fair few scientists that do a lot of poop collecting, and I'm not sure what draws them to it, but there's really good data in there. So in whale poop, you can gather DNA. You can get the DNA of the whale, and that you can, we all have unique individual DNA. I think there's kind of nicer ways to get whale DNA, but that's definitely one way. You can also get the DNA of the stuff that they're eating and various other things about the stuff that they're eating. So it can be super useful. But yeah, so you can identify individual whales genetically, and also like by individual patterns on the tails, but also the dorsal fins. Different species of whales we identify in different ways. Like gray whales by the patterns along the back, because they don't fluke as often. And blue whales by the shape of their dorsal fin and the patterns along their sides, because they also don't lift their tails up so well. Yeah.
Hi, Lynn.
So, hi guys. I know that we're approaching 7 o'clock, and some people were planning it to just be an hour, but I see a lot of questions still in the question box, and so I would like to propose, if it's all right with you guys, that we continue answering some of these questions, and we have an absolute hard stop at 7:30. If we run out of questions, we'll stop sooner. But if it's all right with you guys, and Ted, if that's all right with you, we can continue to do like the question and answer, and Sophie and Simone, maybe you can like bing a bunch of quick questions at Ted. How does that sound? Will that work for everybody?
Oh, okay. Speed round.
Okay, speed round. And
Yeah.
anybody that needs to go, we understand, that's fine. But we'll continue to get a few more questions answered, okay? Thank you.
Hey, I just want to say, if anybody is leaving now, know that the replay will be here.
Yes, you can click this link and watch the entire program again, or you can fast forward and see just the ending if you want.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynn.
Okay, I'll ask a quick question. How many species of whales are there?
About 70 or 80. Most of them are toothed whales, like dolphins, killer whales, sperm whales, and there's about 20, am I getting that right, that are baleen whales, the bigger ones that have filter feeding mouths.
How is an outdoor field environment different from the lab?
We all pretend that we're like in the field, but I sit at my computer a lot.
Yeah.
I love the field because I get to wear a lot of cool gear and all that stuff. I mean, labs are controlled. The wild environment is not necessarily, and I think that is a big part of it, right? When I work in Antarctica, I can't control the weather. I can't control what the whale does. But it's also a lot of work. It's uncomfortable. It means seasickness. It's all kinds of. To me, it's more of an adventure. But the reality is, it's all a balance of both. Lab work, the geneticists who work on whales spend a lot of time just pushing little genetic samples around, and the reality of science is that it's great because it's diverse, but it requires all of the above.
Yeah.
How do whales sleep?
Whales sleep. So we don't really know for the big whales, but with dolphins that have been in controlled environments, with like in an aquarium, It has been measured that they can literally the important thing is we all need to breathe, right? Whales are mammals, they breathe air, right? So they need to be at the surface at times. And unlike us, if you pass out, you'll keep breathing. But if a whale is unconscious, if it's in a deep sleep and it's underwater, would it drown? So it appears that they can switch off half of their brain and sleep half the brain at a time. Do they sleep with one eye open? I see a little comment there. No, probably not. But they they also can go so long between breathing. There is a kind of a whale called a Cuvier's beaked whale that has been measured to dive for 3 hours, right? So imagine not breathing for 3 hours. And that amount of time, I can probably go into a resting state for a chunk of that and then come back and breathe. But we think they'll turn off half their brain.
Wow, that's crazy. So I guess my question is, if we wanted to go whale watching, we being the PBC and Pacifica, maybe Lindemar Beach, what time of year would be best? When would our highest chances be to see a whale? And what kind of whale do you think that might be?
Just from the beach there in Lindemar?
Yeah.
Gray whales are the ones that are going to come the closest to shore. And so in March and April is when they're migrating north, and they stay super close to shore because that protects them from killer whales. So and then some years, if it's an anchovy, a year when the anchovies are super close to shore, like it was 2016, humpback whales were really, really close to shore as well. But probably March, April along the shores there looking for gray whales.
Okay, so humpback whales breathe through their blowholes, right? And how much water, because does water or air come out of those, and how much air or water?
So, the volume of their lungs, there's measurements of this, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but huge. So when you see a whale's blow, and that's condensation, but it's not that there's much water in there. It's just that it's warmed up and it's coming out at high speeds. It goes into cold air, and so it's basically making a mist or a little cloud. So the volume, is probably the volume of a room. But because they're in the water, they don't need their skeleton for structure. So our rib cage is this really rigid structure. Their ribs are free floating, so they can compress their lungs, and they'll blow out 95 or 98% of the volume of their lungs. Whereas every time we breathe, we're blowing out 10% of the volume of our lungs. So it's the whole thing.
Wow. So the next question I really like, do whales ever get lost? And if so, how do they find their way?
Yeah, probably. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Humphrey the Humpback. This will be, long time ago, but the story is kind of still around there. A whale that swam up into the Sacramento River. Definitely they do. And not many, but usually it doesn't necessarily work out too well. Sometimes, so why do they get lost is a really good question. It's really hard to ask them. They can clearly navigate super well. So there's been satellite tags put on whales that were at the beginning of the migratory season, and they're literally navigating within 1 degree. So they know where they're going, and they're just going straight there. We don't really know exactly how they are navigating, but they're I'm swimming to Norway or straight away. But it's, there's cases every few years we have whales that go deep into San Francisco Bay, and they might just be exploring, but they also might, it's usually juveniles. So, just high school kids get lost and don't know what to do for a while, and kind of wandering around and figuring out what to do with life. And then, then hopefully they smell the ocean and head back out to sea. hard to say too much what is exactly going on, but some percentage of them will totally just like end up someplace random.
Wow.
Okay, so I have a question about boating or like ship strikes in whales. How come ships don't just see the whales and go around them?
So think about this for scale, right? So like, have you ever you're driving along, you hit a tin can? Like, have you seen every tin can that, that's in the road? What about at night? And you're distracted and whatever. That is literally the relationship of size between a whale and a large, shipping container ship. Like humpback whale will be, a big blue whale, a really big blue whale will be like 80 tons. A super carrier is going to be like 80,000 tons, right? So 1,000 times the size of the whale. And at night, and the whales are, barely coming up or mostly underwater. The reality is, for one, the whales aren't accustomed to having to avoid ships because they're accustomed to being the largest things in the ocean. And it really is only in the last 50 years that they aren't the largest things in the ocean. And the ships don't see them partly because we've never seen it as something we need to do. Now, it would be totally reasonable. There's a colleague at Woods Hole who is making this system where they detect the blow of a whale using an infrared camera. So you could be like, okay, look, computer screen that says there's a whale and there's a whale and there's a whale, and respond accordingly. These are the kinds of things like you want to be basically the tech environmental hero. There's totally a space for the gear, the tools, the toys that can actually allow us to see whales and respond accordingly, make them safer. Yeah. And just what the comment says, big boats are hard to steer or they turn slowly. And that's the reality of it. Is even if you see that whale and you're going 20 knots and the whale's ahead of you, you can't just slam on the brakes. And so whales get hit.
Mm-hmm. I guess this kind of flows into the next question. I saw this in the chat box, but do whales mourn and feel sad? Or do they show a lot of emotion?
Cool question. Yeah. So, okay, killer whales. I said they have some of the tightest social bonds of any animal that we know of. There was a case of a killer whale whose calf died, and she literally carried the calf's body for a month, just pushing it around on her head. So heartbreaking, super, super heartbreaking. And humpback whales, they have, so gray whales got the name devilfish by whalers, which I thought was kind of funny because not funny, haha, but the whalers' technique for hunting the gray whales was to spear the calf, because then the mom would follow the calf, but she would also be super aggressive and try to smash the boat that killed her calf. And I'm like, yeah, well, if you hurt my daughter, you better believe I'm going to do everything I can to smash you. It doesn't seem very much like devil behavior at all. But there's been some pretty wild stuff so every spring, the gray whales are migrating north. And when they come by Monterey Bay, they sometimes swim offshore, and they sometimes swim in really close to shore. The ones that swim offshore will actually sometimes get attacked by killer whales, where the killer whales come in and try to separate the calf from the mom. Humpbacks have taken to trying to interrupt these hunts, which is super intense. And it's well, are the humpbacks that are interrupting the hunts, maybe these are moms who have lost a calf to the whales? So that's kind of speculation. Very clear with the killer whales. But another thing we should think about is the emotions that we feel when we feel, I love my wife, I love my dog, I love my daughter, in a way that's super strong, right? The part of my brain that feels that emotion is some of the oldest parts of my brain. So whales are very advanced and very intelligent, they clearly have that part of their brains. So do our dogs, and so do even, like all the way down the line. Pretty much we can safely say that all mammals are capable of feeling love, and probably lots of other species too, birds, reptiles, in a way that's like, it's a little bit unusual to think about it, but yeah, it's pretty, like, anatomically, the parts are there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how long can a whale swim underwater before they need to breathe?
Well, in the case of these beaked whales, 3 hours, which just blows my mind. With humpbacks, usually they'll breathe about every 5 or 10 minutes, but they definitely can hold their breath 45 minutes. And since they'll do that, like casually when they're resting, they can probably hold their breath for substantially longer. So with a humpback, I would say maximum probably an hour. Yeah. And to do that, they have much thicker blood than we do. They blow out like much more of the oxygen in their lungs, so they're putting a lot more oxygen into their blood. Lots of different adaptations to be able to deal.
Another interesting question was about whales in captivity, and why do they? I think it was why do whales die so young in captivity?
I think it's pretty rough this is, there's the really large whales, baleen whales and such, never been in captivity, but killer whales, it does not seem to be a healthy space for them. Probably it is depression. Probably it's just not a healthy environment in terms of, not like they're getting enough food, but they're just like, will to live isn't there.
Yeah.
There's been like this, I don't really know honestly too much about captive stories, other than, captivity is not the place for great whales, much as I don't really want to be in jail. It is a common thing among killer whales of, just like these animals are not, it's not a healthy place for them.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of you showed us some pictures of whales like getting entrapped in like fishing and just trash in general. Is that mainly the kind of trash that affects them, or do smaller pieces of trash like what we pick up, how does that affect them?
Yeah, good question. Sperm whales, this guy right here, if you can see that on the wall, there's some reflection. They definitely, there's a lot of the sperm whales that have stranded have a lot of trash in their stomach. And that's just a bummer. It's basically when a piece of plastic is in the water, it'll grow algae on it. Excuse me. And that algae, for some reason, it seems like that algae is kind of like, it fools them into thinking that it might be a squid or it might be something edible. I'm not super sure about this, but these are animals that can clearly distinguish things underwater, and yet they're going and they're eating things that are, not natural, plastic. And so you definitely have cases of whales literally starving with their mouths full. And, the rate of the volume of trash in the ocean, I just so love the Pacific Beach Coalition for the trash cleanups. And I mean, every cigarette butt that goes into the ocean probably kills a fish, and then the other thing that's really hard to, we're trying to start to get an idea about this, but like microplastics, not only very small stuff, but also when plastics break up and become just molecules, algae grows on that. And then those get eaten by small fish and by krill and such, and that gets eaten by larger animals. And so you have bioaccumulation of more and more, non-organic stuff becoming part of the bodies of these animals. We don't know the impact of that, but it might be pretty toxic. Really hard to say.
Yeah, I'm getting a message from Ashling, and she's wondering if you could go into a little bit about conservation and like, are there any like laws trying to get passed right now to stop whaling, or like what, I don't know, what can we do, I guess is.
Yeah, stoked to hear that question. Look, the reality is that, well, in a few days we have a different president. And I know not everyone here is in the U.S., but boy, I don't want to get into politics, but there's two laws that without which we would not have the species of whales that we have, and seals and dolphins, like the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. Both in the last 4 years have just been like gutted, like just the laws are still there, but all the mechanisms for enforcing them have just been like torn apart. And I think it's a super important thing for us to realize. It is the choice of every single generation to keep these laws. It's the choice of every one of us who, if we value the oceans, we have to act accordingly and choose to maintain the laws and develop new laws as situations change. And I think plastics is a classic one of these. Like, do we choose to say, oh yeah, single-use plastics, it's really convenient to just have a plastic bag with everything, but do we need that? And is that good for the planet? Like, in the short term, it's really convenient and easy, but do we want, an ocean full of trash? And what is the consequence of that ocean full of trash? These are the choices that we make. And I think, like, Marine Mammal Protection Act passed in 1971, Endangered Species Act passed in 1970s, I can't remember when. Clean Water Act was passed by George Bush Sr. So that would have been, what was that, like early 90s? I can't remember. These laws and the ones that haven't been passed yet, like, these are the choices of our generation. So what we need for the next laws, the thing that we're really working hard on are marine protected areas. And I think that's super important, is basically taking chunks of the ocean and saying, this is a space to not have commercial fishing. We totally benefit from that here. Like, there's the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, the Farallones Marine Sanctuary. We have this network of sanctuaries along our coastline. Fishing is allowed, commercial fishing, recreational fishing, boating is allowed. There's all kinds of different uses allowed, but it's managed. And because of that, like, every fisherman hates the rules, but they love having the fish, and if we have no rules, then we end up with what happened, with Cannery Row. Monterey completely collapsed because they took all the fish, right? So, yeah, good question.
What would you say to students considering becoming a scientist and doing what you do?
Do it. It's a hard life, I don't know, hard life. Like it's not easy, right? So the great thing about science is that it's always challenging. The hard thing about science is that it is always challenging. And quite frankly, we haven't, as a society, valued science, I think, nearly as much as we benefited from science. I think, like, in the 1950s, it was like, science will save us. And now we're like, oh, science is complicated. Let's just like read something on Twitter and respond accordingly. And I think that's kind of the constant frustration. And, funding it's not a way to get rich. Maybe, science, tech science, sometimes you can get rich and all that, but it's super rewarding. And I think to me, that's the part that I love about science, is that this is engaging and it makes me feel like my life is meaningful. I'm out here doing something that's like, it's not just me taking it for myself, but I'm giving something back that I think benefits others. And that's a good path to follow.
Yeah. I think getting more into the specifics, do you know of any careers that, I don't know, we should look into if we're interested in whales?
Yeah. So we have a lot of great institutions that teach marine biology, right? I mean, I think most high schools now will have some kind of marine biology options. And every college in California has some marine biology studies. But so it's an interesting field because it's competitive for sure, and it takes commitment. But it also, the opportunities are super diverse. I think there's a lot of neat programs that one can volunteer in, like the Marine Mammal Center, for example, has this huge network of volunteers which is a great way to get experience, just like working with live animals once you get enough time and training. I mean, to study the oceans and study marine biology and study marine mammals is just something of a passion, right? And so it's just digging in. And I mean, the coolest part about it is seeing the inspiration of the each and every next generation. I mean, normally it will take focusing on marine biology in college and then a graduate program, a master's degree, a PhD, which is a long road, but it's also a super fun and interesting road. And usually it'll end up being, I had a guy interning, he's in college and he was doing some happy whale work. And I just saw this posting of like, hey, marine mammal observers needed for a voyage to Antarctica. I sent it to him. It's like, here's an opportunity, right?
Sign me up.
Yeah, right, exactly. But you need to have some some experience with that, like time at sea and ability to identify whales, and and so on. It's takes time and effort and commitment, but there's options, there's opportunities.
And Izzy Burns is also in the chat saying environmental science is also a great thing to study.
Yep.
Hi, Lynn. You're muted.
We have a few more minutes. I'm muted. Oh my gosh.
I'm not.
You're good now.
Okay, we have a few more minutes, but I just wanted to pose one question, and that is, what can these kids do now? How can they help the whales? How can they help the environment? And what things might you recommend for them to do and to use their voices and to kind of make a difference?
Yep. I mean, the shining example is like Greta Thunberg standing up and just being like, hey, adults, you're being idiots, and as we are, we're being such idiots. It's just stunning how incompetent we are managing this world and this society. And I'm sorry for that, really am. I mean, honestly, how do you help the oceans? Join a Pacific Beach Coalition plastic cleanup. That's an awesome start. Let's see, little post there. Skip the straw. Use reusable water bottles. Totally. Every piece of plastic that you don't use is a chunk of petroleum that is not extracted from the ocean, from the earth, and not spreading around molecules of compounds that should have stayed in the earth. I think too, there's a lot to education at this point in your lives, which is that what you learn now when you see the world as a vast possibility, as opposed to like, as for some reason humans, we seem to get more selfish and more self-centered and more kind of closed-minded with time, and that's just kind of dumb, but that's how we are. I think getting politically involved, and which is frustrating because we want to see change happen like this, but it happens more like this, and I mean, here we are just trying to figure out how to not be racist and not, and differentiate between like an actual threat and someone with a different color skin. I mean, and that to me, it's so existential that we just don't even know how to behave as responsible adults. I mean, I think it's upon the youth of today to look at all this and say, answer for yourselves. Where do you fit in? And the best way to do that is to just jump in. You see any, a beach cleanup, a seminar about whale conservation, whatever it is. I love it. There's a whole bunch of really cool links coming up here. There's a lot to be done. There's also a lot of really neat. There's a lot of web. I think citizen science is a really cool thing to get involved in, and there's web-based stuff where you can, you go online and there's if you go to zooniverse.org, there's all these different projects where you can go and you classify images to help determine, where like in the background, the scientists are using that data to learn something about what's in the images. We used to have a couple of really nice universe projects. And this is kind of the same, that's the computer-based same end of what we do. It's like photograph a whale, send it to us, and that's a data point that we didn't have before. And that has been genuinely huge. I mean, it's literally because of that we know almost every whale in the North Pacific Ocean. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Girls, do you have anything else you
Well-
want to, anything you know, for a last question or two?
I just wanted to say.
I think that's it.
Oh,
How
I,
about
You
each
go,
of you?
Sophie.
that was a great place to stop, and I think I just wanted to thank everyone
Yeah.
who helped us. Annie, Ashling, and Ella are on the Junior Beach Coalition, and they helped run it from behind the scenes, and Amelia as well. If you are a teen and you're interested in joining our Junior Beach Coalition, you can definitely do that with some of the links, and reach out to become a Street to Beach partner and also part of our teen group.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I
and
love
thanks, Ted, of
what you're
course,
doing.
for
It's just this, like, I'm going to get out here and organize a talk. I mean, I wouldn't pretend that I'm saying anything so special, but that's super cool because that's an experience that will just serve you so well. It's like getting up in front of a crowd and talking.
Mhm.
It's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
You guys,
thank
this is-
you, Ted, too, for coming and talking to us. And like, this is so awesome. I think it's, like I said, I think it's so important to get the youth involved early on, so we can make better choices. And it's just so awesome. I mean, look at the outcome. We had 283 people. That
That's so
was
cool.
like
Yeah,
incredible.
so many
Like just
questions.
last week we had 25. Yeah, it was just incredible.
Nice.
Yeah, so and
Thank
you
you.
guys, I invite you to do what Simone and Sophie and Ashling and all these people behind the scenes. They're using their voice. They're organizing students in their own classrooms, in their own schools. They're organizing things like this. They're going out quite often and cleaning up beaches and leading people on beach cleanups. And I invite all students, all teachers, every person that's here to do something and to find a way. Ted, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Pacific Beach Coalition for making a huge difference and for taking time to share all these amazing things about whales. And Hardy, behind the scenes, thank you for using your platform, for making it happen for us. We're very blessed, guys. We're very blessed to be able to have a passion that we can share with each other and to learn this information and to really kind of experience what it takes to use our voices. And we can do that by showing and setting an example, or by organizing an event like this, and just by being cheerful and being productive in our lives for the environment. So with that, I'm not sure, Sophie, Simone, if you want to close it out, but I want to thank everybody for participating, and thank you to the teachers, for sharing this event. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone just put in the chat you can share the replay with your friends and family as well. So definitely remember to do that if you have someone
Yes.
who you think would benefit from watching this. So
Yeah. And keep your eyes open on the Pacific Beach Coalition page, because we will have future talks like this if it was something you enjoyed. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you, Ted.
Turnout.
All right. Have a good night, all. Cheers.
bye.
Thank you, Ted. All right, guys.
Bye everybody.